I am 82 years old today. I'm sitting in a kitchen that costs more than my father made in a decade, drinking a cup of tea that has gone cold because I forgot I was holding it. I spent most of this morning looking at the grain of the wood on my dining table, wondering when exactly it was that I decided this was what mattered. I think when you reach a certain age, the world starts to peel back the layers of the things you told yourself were important. For a long time, I told myself that I was building something. I told myself that every late night, every missed dinner, and every flight I took while my children were sleeping was a brick in a wall that would protect us all. I was successful by every metric the world cares to measure. I have the house in the right neighborhood, the accounts that will never run dry, and a name that used to carry weight in rooms with mahogany doors. But today, on my 82nd birthday, the only person who has called me is my accountant to discuss a tax filing. My children sent cards. They're beautiful cards with printed sentiments about the man who provided everything, and they arrived right on time. But they didn't call. And I realized this morning that I can't even be angry with them for it. I taught them how to live without me. I spent 40 years being a ghost in my own home, and now that I finally have the time to be present, I found that the seats at the table have already been filled by my absence. It's a strange thing to realize you've won a game that didn't actually have a prize. I remember being 35. I remember the feeling of the suit I wore, the way it made me feel like I was armored against the world. I was the vice president then, the youngest the firm had ever seen. I used to come home at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I would walk through the door feeling a sense of righteous exhaustion. I would look at my wife, Sarah, who was usually folding laundry or reading a book by the dim light of the floor lamp, and I would feel superior. I was the one out there in the trenches. I was the one making the real sacrifices. I remember one night specifically, though I couldn't tell you the year, only the feeling of it. Sarah had asked me if I could take the following Friday off because our daughter Emily had a solo in the school choir. I remember laughing, not unkindly, but with a sort of dismissive weight. I told her that I had a closing that day that was worth more than the school's entire annual budget. I told her that Emily would understand, eventually, that the life she lived, the dance lessons, the private school, the summers at the lake, was paid for by those missed Fridays. I thought I was being a good father. I truly, honestly believed that providing was a synonym for loving. I didn't realize that I was just paying for my own replacement in their lives. Emily didn't cry when I told her I wouldn't be there. She just nodded and went back to her homework. At the time, I took that as a sign of her maturity. Now I realize it was the sound of a door closing. She had simply stopped expecting me to be there. And once a child stops expecting you, you've lost the only thing that actually matters. I spent the next 2 decades chasing the next title, the next bonus, the next mountain to climb. I remember the 1990s as a blur of airport terminals and hotel rooms that all smelled like the same brand of industrial lemon cleaner. I knew the flight attendants' names better than I knew my son's teachers. I told myself it was temporary. I told Sarah that in 5 years I'll slow down. But 5 years would pass, and there would be a new merger, or a new crisis, or a new competitor that required me to stay in the race. The thing about success is that it's a finish line that moves every time you get close to it. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your whole life running until you realize you're the only one left on the track. Sarah stayed. She was a good woman, a patient woman. She filled our home with life, so that the silence I left behind wouldn't be so loud. She went to the games, the recitals, the graduations. She sat in the emergency rooms when the kids had fevers. She was the one who knew which neighbor was going through a divorce and which teacher was the hardest on the students. I was just the man who appeared on weekends, usually tired, usually distracted by the BlackBerry vibrating on my belt. I thought I was the head of the family. I didn't realize I was just a financier. When I retired at 65, I expected a grand transition. I thought I would finally step into the life I'd been funding for 40 years. I thought Sarah and I would travel, that I would finally get to know my children as adults, that I would be the quote-unquote patriarch. But when I stopped working, the world didn't stop with me. I walked into my own house and realized I was a stranger in a well-oiled machine. Sarah had her routines, her friends, her gardening club, her charities. The children had their own lives, their own families, their own versions of the hustle I taught them so well. I would sit in my home office waiting for the phone to ring, but the people I had spent 40 years networking with had moved on to the next guy with the title. The importance I had built was tied to my desk. When I left the desk, the importance stayed behind. It didn't follow me home. And then Sarah got sick. It was a slow decline, the kind that forces you to look at every minute you ever wasted. I spent the last 2 years of her life sitting by her bed, trying to make up for 40 years of absence in 24 months. I wanted to talk about our life, about our memories. But I realized that many of her best memories didn't include me. She would talk about a trip she took with the kids to the coast, or a funny thing that happened at a Christmas dinner I had missed because of a crisis at the office. I would nod and smile, but inside, I was grieving for a life I had paid for, but never actually lived. One afternoon, shortly before she passed, she looked at me and said, "You're finally here, Arthur." She wasn't being mean. She was just stating a fact. She was glad I was there at the end, but we both knew I'd missed the middle. And the middle is where the life is. The middle is the Tuesday nights, the rainy afternoons, the quiet morning coffees. I had traded the middle for the end, and now the end was all I had left. Since she's been gone, the silence in this house has become a physical weight. I have all the money I ever wanted. I can go anywhere, buy anything. But there's nowhere I want to go because there's no one who is waiting for me there. My son David is a lot like me. He's a partner at a law firm in the city. When I call him, he's always just heading into a meeting. He speaks to me in the same clipped, efficient tone I use with my own father. He tells me he's crushing it, and I hear the pride in his voice, and it breaks my heart. I want to tell him that the things he's crushing are the only things that will be able to hold his hand when he's 80. I want to tell him that his children won't remember the brand of the car he drove, but they will remember that he wasn't there to teach them how to drive it. But I don't say it because I know he won't hear me. He's still in the part of life where he thinks the gold at the end of the rainbow is actually gold. He doesn't know yet it's just yellow paint on heavy stone. I see people my age on the television or in the magazines talking about legacy. They talk about the buildings they put their names on or the companies they started. But sitting here in this quiet kitchen, I realize that legacy is a lie we tell ourselves to feel less afraid of dying. A building doesn't love you. A company doesn't miss you. The only legacy that exists is the warmth you leave in the hearts of the people who knew you. And I'm starting to think my legacy is a cold room. I find myself doing strange things now to fill the time. I walk through the grocery store slowly, hoping someone will strike up a conversation. I spend too much time talking to the woman at the dry cleaners about the weather. I become one of those old men I used to pity, the ones who seem to cling to any human interaction like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. I used to think those men were failures. I thought they hadn't made it. Now I realize they are just people who have discovered too late that we are not built to be islands. We are built for the small, messy, unproductive business of being together. I think about the success I chased. It was a version of success that required me to be a machine. It required me to prioritize efficiency over empathy and output over connection. And it worked. I became a very good machine. But machines don't have friends. They don't have memories of late night talks or the smell of their children's hair. They just have logs of their operations. I have a very impressive log of operations, but I have no life to show for it. There's a park a few blocks from here where I go sometimes. I sit on a bench and watch the young parents with their toddlers. I see the fathers looking at their watches, looking at their phones, clearly itching to get back to something important. I want to scream at them. I want to grab them by the shoulders and tell them that the email can wait, that the deal doesn't matter, that the person they're trying to impress at work will forget their name in 6 months. I want to tell them that this moment of a child pulling at their pant leg is the only thing that is real. But I don't. I just sit there and watch an old man in an expensive coat, and eventually I go back to my empty house. I don't tell you this because I want your pity. I have lived the life of my own making, and I have to own the results of it. I'm telling you this because I think there is a collective madness that tells us we can put our lives on hold until we've achieved some arbitrary level of security. We think we are paying our dues so that we can enjoy the fruits later. But later is a fickle thing. Sometimes later never comes. And sometimes, by the time later arrives, you've forgotten how to eat the fruit. Or worse, you have no one to share it with. And fruit is always bitter when you eat it alone. I realize today that I don't know what my daughter's favorite book is. I don't know what my son is afraid of. I don't know what Sarah would have wanted to do with her 82nd year if she had made it. I was too busy being successful to learn the basic facts of the people I loved. If I could trade every dollar, every award, and every important meeting for just one more Tuesday night in 1985, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would sit on the floor and play with the blocks. I would listen to the long, rambling stories about school. I would look my wife in the eye and really see her instead of looking past her at the next goal. But you can't buy back time. That's the one thing they don't tell you in business school. Time is the only currency that only devalues. You can't invest it and get more back later. Once you spend it, it's gone. And no amount of success can refund a single second. I'm 82 years old, and I'm the most successful man I know. I'm also the loneliest. The house is quiet now. The sun is starting to go down, and the shadows are getting long across the hardwood floor. I'll probably make myself some toast for dinner. I'll watch the news, though none of it really seems to matter anymore. And I'll wait for tomorrow, which will be exactly like today. I didn't fail at life. I did exactly what I set out to do. I just didn't realize until the very end that I had set out to do the wrong thing. Don't wait until you're 82 to realize that the person you're trying to become isn't someone you'd actually want to spend an evening with. Success isn't what you leave behind in a bank account. It's who is sitting at your table when the lights start to dim. And my table is very, very quiet. I think I'll go to bed now. The silence is easier to handle when you're asleep. If you have someone to call them. Don't tell them you're busy. Just talk to them. Because one day you'll have all the time in the world and no one to talk to. And that is a price no one should have to pay.